In 1980s Soviet Russia, burying the truth had been the norm. Whispers from Moscow saying, "There is no such thing as a serial killer in a communist paradise," seemed to have become a common way of thinking. A serial killer was a sign of a decadent, failing Western society. But in Rostov, the quiet, rotten heart of this lie began to beat, not in the shadows, but in plain sight. This perfect society was about to know the terror of a monster they refused to believe existed. He was a doting grandfather, a quiet worker, always carrying a simple briefcase, thus being considered a trustworthy comrade. And he used the Soviet system, its shame, its bureaucracy, its silence, to hunt, assault, and take the lives of at least 52 people. They called him the Butcher of Rostov, the Red Ripper, but his real name was Andrei Chikatilo, and the story of how he was allowed to kill for over a decade is the darkest indictment of the system that created him. Chikatilo's dark road began in 1936 Ukraine during the starvation known as the Holodomor. His childhood was shaped by poverty, war, and a story his mother never let him forget. That he had an older brother who was kidnapped and cannibalized by starving neighbors. Despite the truthfulness of the story never being established, it was one that left a long-lasting effect on Andrei, becoming one of the pillars of his disturbed mind. He was a lifelong target, friendless and myopic, bullied throughout his high school years due to his frail body caused by constant starvation and malnutrition. As he would once state, he had never tasted bread until he was 12 years old. He was a chronic bedwetter as well, which made his mother constantly berate him. He sought refuge in communist teachings, but his deepest humiliation was physical. He suffered from chronic impotence, a shame that fueled his self-hatred and warped his desires. His impotence prevented him from having a normal life, but his profession gave him opportunity. He drifted through jobs: a laborer, a communications technician, a soldier stationed in East Berlin, and a teacher. As a teacher, complaints of inappropriate contact with the students led to his quiet dismissal. But later, as a supply clerk, he traveled constantly across the Soviet Union, and this job granted him the ultimate luxury for a predator: solitude and mobility. In 1978, in Shakhty, he committed his first documented murder. The sexual dysfunction he couldn't overcome, he replaced with violence. The Red Ripper had finally found his release. His hunting grounds were the railway stations and bus depot. His victims were often the societal dropouts, runaways, orphans, young vagrants, people whose disappearance would go unnoticed, or worse, be blamed on them. He lured them with simple offers: food, drink, a short ride. His signature was grotesque. After the assault, the bodies showed characteristic, severe post-mortem injuries. He confessed to a compulsion to damage the eyes, driven by the old Russian superstition that the last image of the murderer remained on the retina of the victim. Sometimes he engaged in necrosadistic acts, a macabre echo of his childhood trauma. Between 1982 and 1984, the murders exploded. 7 deaths in 1 year, 13 in the next. Bodies piled up faster than police could process them. Yet, the official decree remained the same, that serial killers cannot exist in Russia, that maybe it's just a domestic crime. Police, under the investigation called Operation Lazopolosa, were looking for a monster, but the Soviet lie protected the man. The system itself was his shield. The state's official stance meant that issuing a public warning or admitting a prolific criminal was at large was politically impossible. With a lot of pressure from Moscow regarding the closure of this case as soon as possible, police began looking for anyone that could convict. The target became Alexander Kravchenko, a man with prior convictions who was beaten until he confessed to a crime Chikatilo committed and ended up being executed for it. And this is the true horror of a system that prioritizes ideology over justice. Chikatilo was even arrested in 1984. He was caught trying to lure a girl. A knife and rope were found in his briefcase. Tests were conducted, and his blood type did not match the blood type from the semen found at the crime scene, an anomaly which sometimes might occur. Despite this possibility, they refused to conduct further tests, a fatal error that convinced them they had the wrong man. Investigators were given another chance to put Chikatilo behind bars when he was accused of stealing materials from his workplace. But he was charged only with petty theft, served a mere 3 months, and was released. The Red Ripper, already responsible for a staggering number of murders, was let loose yet again, with a hunger which could not be satiated. Chikatilo immediately resumed killing. The next 6 years were his bloodiest. The post-mortem damage became more frenzied, the acts more desperate. The quiet man with the briefcase, traveling from Rostov to Moscow, Kiev to Tashkent, was bringing death at every step. He was helped by the very fabric of Soviet life. In a society that preached comradeship and respect for elders, a softly spoken, middle-aged man in a suit seemed innately trustworthy. Children were taught to call older strangers uncle. His appearance was a mask which hid a predator's nature. He was a man consumed by a sense of burning humiliation from a lifetime of being mocked and a pathological need to assert dominance over the vulnerable. Homicide for Chikatilo was the only way to turn his crippling shame into absolute power. The necrosadistic acts were a macabre reenactment of his mother's traumatic story. Rostov descended into paranoia. Rumors began to surface. It was a Caucasian gang, a law enforcement official, maybe a high-ranking party member. The police themselves began to crack under the pressure. One officer reportedly hallucinated that he was the killer. The official lie was crumbling, and fear was its replacement. Chikatilo immediately resumed killing. The next 6 years were his bloodiest. The post-mortem damage became more frenzied, the acts more desperate. The quiet man with the briefcase, traveling from Rostov to Moscow, Kiev to Tashkent, was bringing death at every step. He was helped by the very fabric of Soviet life. In a society that preached comradeship and respect for elders, a softly spoken, middle-aged man in a suit seemed innately trustworthy. Children were taught to call older strangers uncle. His appearance was a mask which hid a predator's nature. He was a man consumed by a sense of burning humiliation from a lifetime of being mocked and a pathological need to assert dominance over the vulnerable. Homicide for Chikatilo was the only way to turn his crippling shame into absolute power. The necrosadistic acts were a macabre reenactment of his mother's traumatic story. Rostov descended into paranoia. Rumors began to surface. It was a Caucasian gang, a law enforcement official, maybe a high-ranking party member. The police themselves began to crack under the pressure. One officer reportedly hallucinated that he was the killer. The official lie was crumbling, and fear was its replacement. By the late 1980s, the political situation started to shift under Gorbachev's rule. The truth could no longer be buried. The investigation took a different path, and police started placing vast surveillance on transit hubs. Chikatilo, now 54, was finally being noticed. On November the 20th, 1990, he was apprehended near a bus station. He was carrying in his suitcase the same items as 6 years prior: rope, lubricant, knives, and had spots of blood on his face. This time there was no mistake. The Red Ripper was caught. The key to making him confess was not torture, but psychology, a method which had never been employed before. Dr. Alexander Bukhanovsky, a psychiatrist specializing in serial offenders, created a strikingly accurate profile. A middle-aged married man, bullied, impotent, whose trauma was directed towards necro-sadistic homicide. Bukhanovsky confronted Chikatilo not with evidence, but with a mirror, describing his entire miserable, humiliated inner life. This made Chikatilo break. He confessed to 56 murders. He led investigators to dozens of graves which only he alone knew existed, detailing his crimes in a chilling, meticulous way. His trial was a morbid spectacle. Chikatilo, placed on a stand in a cage, screaming profanities at the grieving families, which were horrified, some even fainting in a courtroom. In October 1992, he was convicted of 52 murders and sentenced to death. The fog which had laid over the Soviet system had been lifted, and justice, delayed and imperfect, was finally delivered. On Valentine's Day 1994, 30 years ago, Andrei Chikatilo, the Red Ripper, was taken to a basement cell in Novocherkassk prison and executed with a single bullet to the back of the head. His legacy is not just a body count of more than 50 innocent souls, but a terrifying reminder that a society that prioritizes a political ideology over an ugly reality is ultimately a society that invites the monster in. Where does the blame really lay? Could everything have been prevented if other resources were available to Chikatilo, whom experienced mental torture from a young age? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As always, our thoughts and prayers go towards the victims and their families. Lives were taken too quick, and justice was served too late. May they find peace in the afterlife. Thank you.